you all recognize that Barclay is exceptionally polite, and therefore you should all take with just a grain of salt his praise of me, although I very much appreciated it. Kai Degner, it was Wenger, Degner, and done. So we're going to do Degner and then.
That's great. Yeah. Hi, Kai Degner. I'm studying listening's role in leadership and organizations through a PhD program here at JMU. And I'll ask a question about that rather than the one I had in the chat, which is, do we societies listen better? Do they make other people feel heard better as opposed to being more speaking oriented and focused on that type of communication? I'm really interested in the degree to which societies can make people feel heard and understood, and leaders can, and organizations can. So I'm curious how if that resonates at all at the macro level that you're looking at.
Kai, if I may, Kai, I rarely take notes on questions, but if I've never heard the question before, I take a note. That's the first time I've heard that question. It's a damn good question. I totally understand the importance of that. I mean, it's obvious, and I don't know why I never thought of it before. My mind, of course, goes to trying to think about what measures I could use I know how to measure the we society, that side of it. I don't know quite how to measure the average listening level.
I asked you that last time you were at JMU, and you stopped in your tracks and looked at the sky and looked at the ground and grabbed your forehead and couldn't think of anything then, but it would be awesome if you could come up with something.
Was I talking about we societies then? I didn't remember.
No. It was just a talk you gave, and we walked together across campus, and I asked you, and I just think, I think it's important.
Well, certainly. You asked me whether I believe the basic claim. Yes, of course I believe the basic claim. Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, inevitably, my cast of mind goes to trying to think about how would I measure. We all know, and some people are good listeners, some people aren't. I'm a bad listener, as it happens. You may have already noticed this. Shaylin's a better listener. Women are better listeners on average than men, although that's mostly because men grab control of conversations. There are gender differences. There almost certainly are ethnic differences. Whether there are, apart from those differences, are there societal level differences? For example, could we say that, I don't know, Swedes are less likely to be talkers and more likely to be listeners than Italians, for example? Yeah, probably we could, but maybe we could. Oh, what an interesting question.
I think Trump made more people feel heard, even though he's a terrible listener. And if we could slice and dice that type of analysis more.
Holy cow.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah. So I like that story. That's a story in which we upper class East Coast, West Coast, upper class coastal elites are not so good at listening to the folks in flyover country. Yeah, that could very well be. I mean, it's funny because I actually grew up in a tiny town in the Midwest, and of my hometown, probably 50% nowadays are vote. When I was growing up, it was mostly Democratic. Now it's mostly Trump country. So but I was always an outlier there, and I was probably the one. I probably got to the right part of the country for me. Got from the listening part of the talking part of the country. But I that's just personal. Beside the point. I think that sounds like really good, and that's something that even has we could move the country towards a we.
Freedom of speech doesn't matter unless nobody's listening. If we are a society where speech is supposed to matter most, we need to be the best listeners, because that's what's going to make that.
Why? And now I'm asking myself, why have we gotten so wrapped around about free speech in the sense of trying to silence people? Why have we focused more on the question of affirmatively listening to people?
Right.
I mean, actually, that I'm making that point without regard to left or right. Now, I mean, why? And I would, of course, as political, I'd like to say, well, you know, the right is not very good at listening, but I don't actually know that that's true at all. I mean, actually, I guess maybe the opposite is true. Anyway, it's a really good question that forces me to think a lot hard about preconceptions. Thank you for that.
I'm going to add, Bob, that you were probably told, but probably don't remember, that Kai was the founder back at the time of the Iraq War of the Orange Band Initiative that tried to get people from different sides on the war issue to talk to each other. He was a JMU student at that time, and that spread around the country. But this is
I see.
claim to fame besides being a very young.
So what you're telling me is
he's been very into this, getting people to listen to each other for a long time.
he just reused his standard line in talking to me. I got that.
No, I had it wrong. We were trying to get people talking to each other. And I think all these civil discourse things about getting us to talk across lines have all the framing exactly opposite.
Yeah, that is so interesting.
Yeah.
That is, you need more airtime. I wish if I can do anything to give you more airtime, let me know.
I'll email you.
Let me suggest.
Thanks for listening.
Okay, let me suggest that the center left and center right people are better listeners than the far left and far right people.
Yeah, I think
There's better be a left versus right.
Yeah, that's probably true too.
All right, well, we're getting down to it. Is it anybody else who wants to say?
I'm going to have to go, and
Okay.
I almost never say that.
Okay, well, Bob, I'm going to throw one final thing to you when you're talking about religion and race. I think you're right that in terms of the mass population, the evangelical movement was important, but you're sitting there at Harvard, and of course, some of the largest public supporters on the white side of the abolitionist movement were people associated with Harvard, Unitarian theologians, and so on, and transcendentalists and people like that. So I'll go out with that. Okay, well, I think we're really done. Bob needs to go. So thank you very much, Bob, and thanks to everybody who's here, and thank to Dave Jones, and yeah, I guess later things will be sent out of a recording. So